Good economy. Another foot? Yeah. All right. Yeah.
Process and the state of the plans to date for any exploratory work that they are doing in the Loch Estuary. After that, we will hear from Keith Ross, who will be speaking on behalf of people who have concerns about coal gasification. And then, following those two presentations, we will have an opportunity for people to ask questions. And I would ask, please, if people can note down their question, note down your name, wave your piece of paper up in the air, and we'll ask people to come and collect them. I will then call you to speak so you can say your question, but it will, I hope, facilitate things, enable us to get through perhaps more questions than otherwise. And perhaps stop too much duplication. So that's the way we're going to run things for today. So very briefly, let's go through that again. We'll hear the planning officer first and take questions on the planning process. We'll then hear from Tough Natural Resources, the company which has got the licences for work in the Loch Estuary, and then we will hear from Keith Ross putting forward the concerns of objectors to underground coal gasification. Then there'll be an opportunity for people to ask questions. So as I say, if you would kindly put your name and your question on the piece of paper. I've had some given to me already. I'm sure as the course of the presentation goes through, there may be some questions which arise, some things that you think of, and obviously there'll be a chance then for us to take those questions afterwards. If you want a question directed to a particular person on the panel, then again, please note that on your question paper. Right, so if I can first of all then ask if you would come forward and tell us a little bit how the planning process would actually work if an application were made.
We'll be looking at it from the context of planning policy, from a planning perspective. As part of the application process, we will have a number of technical consultees. When the application comes in, our consultation process, there are some people who are automatic consultees, NRW for instance, the former CCW Environment Agency, they will be a statutory consultee. We'll be looking to consult with environmental health officers about air quality and emissions. We'll be looking at any transport assessment through our highways division. So we have a number of technical consultees. Being as planners, we're not experts in all the fields, but we usually know who is, and then we go and ask them for their advice, and then we make a balanced judgment based on the advice that we receive.
Mine more, a lot of it's been said about the use of different chemicals when drilling the wells. Mine was, will you be applying normal UK drilling standards in the selection approval of those, because what goes into the well will come back out of the well over time?
We'll be looking at the process, and essentially what goes down the well. The concern is the impact that has on groundwater and aquifers. Now, National Resources Wales will be our advisors on what happens to groundwater and aquifers. So with that process, we will look at, yes.
If I could ask Sue from Swansea, please, and Bill Hyde, if you could just indicate
Thank you. Firstly, I'd like to say this applies to the Carmarthenshire side of the estuary. Will there have to be separate planning consent and same process gone through on the Swansea side as it affects the area throughout the Gower and throughout the other side of the estuary as well?
At the moment, we don't know whether any surface development is going to be on the Carmarthenshire side or the Swansea side, but the process will be essentially the same. The only difference would be, if it was on the Swansea side, they would have to apply their local development plan policies rather than ours, but they would have to apply policies just like we would. So that whether the planning authority is Swansea or Carmarthenshire, or effectively Welsh Government's Marine Consenting Division, the policies are still going to be the same.
So, although this is likely to affect people on the other side of the estuary as well, if the development above ground is in this side of the estuary, then the people on the Swansea side of the estuary will not have the same rights to attend planning meetings because their development will be underground and the effect will be underground for them.
The definition of development is anything that occurs in, on, over or under land.
However, the definition of effects of development are somewhat different. Thank you.
Bill Hyde. I'd like to ask you what will be the position with the actual planning application? I'm not sure what the company intends to do. Maybe you've got an idea. Are they intending to put one planning application in for all the works together? Because what is going to be needed beside the drilling process is a farm. And when I say a farm, I'm talking about a gas farm, where you've got scrubbers, you've got tanks for storing the gas. Or is that going to come at a later date from the actual drilling process? Could you answer that question?
I'm not able to actually. As I said at the outset, this is the first time I've met anyone from Clough, so I'll be staying after my presentation to listen to what they have to say, because it would be the first time I would have heard it. So I don't know as yet what the planning process is going to entail for us in Carmarthenshire or for Swansea or for Welsh Government's Marine Licensing Division, because we've not had any approaches as yet. But you're right, there will be surface development. There will need to be surface development to actually produce the stuff that goes down the injection well, to produce the oxygen, the steam, the ignition, and there will be a production well, which brings syngas to the surface, which may well need to be processed on site, but it will certainly need to be stored. So there will be surface development, I would imagine, as part of the process. But we will have to look at any planning application on its merits. We will consult widely, and I would say, as the person who's probably going to be dealing with the application, if it comes into Carmarthenshire, we would be foolhardy not to consult with Swansea, because there may be an impact on an adjoining local authority area. So we would certainly involve people from Swansea.
Just checking. Yeah, that's good. Okay. Just a quick query. Jim Dunphy's the name. I just wanted to clarify, as much as this falls within the local town and country planning system, am I right in assuming that this application, if it raises novel consequences, if you like, can be called in by the Welsh Government?
Every application could be called in by Welsh Government, yes, and there may be requests to call in. If an application comes in, Welsh Government would have to deal with that request, and they may call it in or may not. Obviously, the test tends to be if it raises issues of more than local significance.
Which an application like this is quite likely to.
Well, people can make their own views on it, can't they? And if anybody thinks that is the case, I'm sure they will invite Welsh Government to look at a call-in procedure. But at the outset, it falls with the local authority until such time as Welsh Government takes that view.
Not the coastline of Carmarthen that's got the highest level of protection. And in fact, part of the estuary is also in the Gower area of outstanding natural beauty. My question is, who gives drilling permission for drilling in the estuary? A major concern is that, they're not just going to drill under Carmarthen, they're going to drill right out into the estuary. So who gives permission for that? And when do they give the permission? Do they give the permission at the time of the test drilling? Or is that going to be considered at a later stage? Thank you.
The jurisdiction down to low water mark is with the local authority. Beyond low water mark, out to 12 nautical miles, is Welsh Government. That's where the permissions would lie. The consent for exploratory drilling, rather than the development itself, would still fall to the same people. Up to low water mark would be the local authorities. After low water mark out to 12 miles is Welsh Government through NRW.
Excuse me, can you please tell me how NRW are financed and who they're answerable to?
I don't know the answer to that one. I don't know. Not working for NRW. I'm sorry, I couldn't tell you how exactly they're financed. My guess is they're financed by the government, but that would be a guess.
Hi, my name is Robert Williams. Can you tell us if Carmarthenshire Council has any undeclared or declared interest in underground gold classification? Do you have any investments by your pensions, plans for the local council, or any other such interests?
I have absolutely no idea, I'm afraid. Because being a planner, I don't deal with whatever pension fund. I've got money in the pension fund, I hope, but that's all I know, really.
So I think there have been problems in other councils where they have actually ended up investing in fracking or underground gold classification, and that might influence the planning process, and hopefully that will affect this area.
Well, I'm not aware that a financial pension scheme investment has ever been involved in a planning application. Certainly one that I've been dealing with. We've never looked at who owns the pension, who's investing in the company. Because it's a land use based system, we are not allowed to take account of who the applicant is. We need to look at the application and the development as proposed, the applicant, or even the applicant's track record in some instances, which some people would like us to take account of. We can't, because we've only got to look at the development itself.
Hello, it's to do with the monitoring of the wells. Oh, my name's Helen from Fracking. The wells, if they're out at sea, the environmental impacts, I realise there's a bit of a gap there. Under what authority will they be monitored? And who will be doing the environmental assessment of them?
If the application comes to the local authority, falls within local authority jurisdiction, we will look at the environmental statements and we will do the environmental impact assessment. Being as this is SAC as well, it's likely that there's going to be habitats regulations impact as well. So as an authority, Carmarthenshire is called a competent authority for the purposes of habitat. We will have to do the test of likely significant effects and the appropriate assessment as well under the habitat regs. And it's only if you can pass those two processes can you grant development, because you can't grant development that doesn't pass those two processes, because it would be contrary to EU policy and legislation. We'd be in an awful lot of trouble.
To Burry Port today. My name is Tony Lodge. I'm head of policy for Clough Natural Resources. My very first job was in the coal industry just after it was privatised in 1994 with RJB Mining, where we tried to make a go of the Selby coalfield and the other big coalfields up in the north of England. I then went to work in energy policy, which explains my role now with Clough Natural Resources. What you're about to see and hear is a slide presentation which will be given by Mr. Keith Layfield, who has a long and distinguished background in the British coal industry and is now a consultant to Clough Natural Resources. The technology working here in the United Kingdom, specifically in sites where we have got licenses from the Coal Authority. We have sites, and we will detail the sites in England, Wales and Scotland, and why we think potentially for the United Kingdom there's a great advantage, both using what we are calling stranded coal we could never get to with the old collieries and mines of the past. It is there in large quantities. Why we think the technology has a role for Britain in the future, as we are going to become more gas dependent, whether we like it or not. And ultimately, we're here to answer any of the questions you have. We've come down from London today. Keith admittedly is from Wales, but we've come down from London to answer as many questions as you have, so please, as you will, do feel free to ask them. But first of all, if I can ask Keith to come up to the platform.
Good afternoon. My name is Keith Layfield, and I was born in Pontypridd, brought up in the Rhondda Valleys, and like a lot of boys at that time, I started in the coal industry in 1963. By the 1980s, I became the area surveyor for South Wales, and so it's in that position I amassed considerable information about the South Wales coalfield. I later went on to become the chief surveyor for British Coal on a national basis, based in Nottingham, and dealt with issues such as subsidence on a national level. So I'd like to think I know a little bit about subsidence in particular, and I'd like to think I know something about the South Wales coalfield. I'd like to talk to you today. One of the policies that Clough made right at the beginning was that they would only deal with deep UCG. And if you look at situations around the world, and many of them are on the internet, so I'm sure you can research them yourself, they very often shallow UCG. But Clough took a policy decision that he would only deal with deep UCG. And you will see, I hope, as we go through this, there are fundamental differences between coal close to the surface and coal at considerable depth beneath the surface.
Giving us that presentation. We're going to move on now to have the other presentation, which is Keith Ross from Safe Energy and Frack-Free Wales. So Keith is just going to set up, and then what we'll do then is we'll take questions. I'm trying to group the questions in groups of topics at the moment, and we'll call you as soon as Keith finishes. So Keith is going to put a point of view which I think some of you share, and it's probably easier if it's done by one person in a logical sequence, perhaps than jumping from person to person. So that's the reason for doing this that way, and then having questions rather than having lots of opinions. I just say, while Keith is getting ready, you ready? Right. I'd just like to thank the councillors in Burry Port who took the initiative and wanted to get this meeting going, and thank Moira Thomas, the Mayor, who's here today. And just to answer one question from somebody from Hendy, who asks me, where is he? Steve Evans, you here? Stuart, sorry. Yes, did you want to just ask your question and I'll answer it?
If every person, not just here, in Carmarthenshire or Swansea, but in the whole of Wales, was to vote against the colonial exploitation of our natural resources, could we stop it, or would it be forced through by London?
Well, I think the answer to that is, as Hugh Towns has quite clearly explained, planning processes are dealt with in Wales.
So it would be the Labour government in Cardiff then that would force it through?
It would be the Carmarthenshire County Council Planning Authority, and it would be the Welsh Government if it were called in.
So it would be the Labour councillors in Carmarthenshire who were in bed with the independents who would force it through?
What we're saying is the people who have those powers will be the people who pass planning in the Carmarthenshire County Council for the areas which the council can...
Why does your party not want Wales to own its own natural resources?
Right. I've just explained to you the powers are here.
Why did you not vote for Wales to own Welsh water? Why did your party not turn up and vote?
Right. Can I just say quite clearly, today's meeting is about underground coal gasification. I've got no problem whatsoever in justifying what I've done and where I voted and what I've done. I'm quite happy to do that at another public meeting. But today, I know people have come specifically for this topic. We're going to deal with this topic now, and I'd like to move on now and ask Keith Ross to put his presentation forward.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's wonderful to see so many people here on a wet, grey Saturday afternoon.
Differently to people.
And I think that just reflects the level of interest
what she
that there
demonstrated
in
is
this
that
subject and the many issues around it.
politicians
I'm not going to keep
things
you as long as the previous
into different
speaker.
aspects.
I'm going to talk for about 15 to 20 minutes.
People don't.
And hopefully up the pace a bit. I'd like to start by correcting something you said earlier. I'm not a member of Fracking.
Politicians don't integrate life.
And the reason I want to stress that is that Fracking is an organisation that opposes unconventional gas development, and just that. Safe Energy, the organisation that I represent, we also have a positive side to what we do, and you'll see some of that later in the presentation. It's a real shame that Mr. Clough couldn't be with us this afternoon, because I was really looking forward to meeting him, as I'm sure many of you were. But I suppose we'll have to live with our disappointment. Now, I should start by saying that, contrary to the previous speaker, I'm not an expert on underground coal gasification. In fact, I'm not really an expert on anything. I'm not a geologist, I'm not an engineer, or any kind of scientist. I don't have any experience whatsoever in the oil and gas industry. So I'm not in a position to challenge anything that you've just been told from a technical or scientific point of view. And so I don't intend to run through a litany of the concerns that people have about underground coal gasification. I know that many of you will have seen these already from our leaflets and from the public meetings that took place last year, or from your own research, and both of the previous speakers went through some of them in some detail. So I'm not going to subject you to that again. Now, I understand that Mr. Clough is quite close to the Conservative Party, and therefore close to the current government. So it may help us to understand what he means by the national interest if we take a look at what the interests of the government might be. Now, I appreciate this is a very complicated slide, and but it shows some of the relationships between the current government and the oil and gas industry. Now, up at the top here, two people at the top, the gentleman on my left, if this were a pack of cards, he would be our ace of spades. This is Lord John Brown, former chairman of BP, currently chairman and 30% owner of Quadrilla, the company involved in fracking operations in Lancashire and Balkan. Dubbed the UK's fracking czar by campaign group Frackoff, he currently works in the Cabinet Office. Now, our Queen of Spades would be the lady next to him, Baroness Hogg. She's a senior director for gas exploration and production at BG Group. That's a shale gas operator working in both the USA and Australia. She's also a senior non-executive director at the UK Treasury. the department that recently produced draft regulations for unconventional gas development in the UK. For our nave, we have this chap here, Linton Crosby. He's the founder of Crosby Textile, which is part of CIT Group. Not sure what all these initials mean. But they are lobbyists for the oil and gas industry, amongst others. Now, he's a special advisor to the Prime Minister, and apparently one of the strongest influences on our government. And down at the bottom here, we have the joker in the pack. Baron Howell of Guildford. He of the desolate northeast fame. A renowned advocate of shale gas, he was Transport and Energy Minister in Margaret Thatcher's government, and until recently a personal advisor to the Foreign Secretary, William Hague, on energy security. He's also George Osborne's father-in-law.
Wonderful.
But those three are just the tip of the iceberg. According to reports, there are over 100 people at the heart of our government who have either personal or family links to the energy industry. Now, the idea of bringing people from outside the political spectrum in to advise government departments is nothing new. It's been going on for a long time. But I don't think there's ever been a government in the UK in modern times that has been so deeply infiltrated by one particular section of the business world. So it's easy to see how our government might assume that the national interest is, at least in part, synonymous with the interests of the oil and gas industry. And I suspect that Mr. Clough might be talking the same language. But enough of politics for a moment. Let's get back to our lovely estuary and to the local community. Because if something's in the national interest, it must surely also be in the interests of us. Even if it's safe, as you've just been told, you, the people of Burry Port and the surrounding area, are still going to have to put up with the disruption and the dirt and the noise and heavy vehicles driving up and down your roads and air pollution from burning off the waste gases and all the other inconveniences that go with heavy industry. So what are you going to get in return? Not a lot.
Bribes.
Will it help to bring down gas prices, as Chancellor George Osborne constantly claims shale gas will do? No. Even the aforementioned Lord Brown, pictures on, Chairman of Kudrilla, has confirmed that unconventional gas development in the UK will not lower energy prices. There's been much talk of the shale revolution bringing down prices in the USA, but the USA has an internal market, so they control their own energy prices. Whereas here in the UK, energy is bought and sold on the international market, and the pricing is way out of our control. There will be no savings to energy users. And it seems that the Labour Party agrees. This is the opening paragraph of the Labour Party position paper, which was produced recently. And you'll see it says there, shale gas is unlikely to be a game changer for consumer bills or energy security. You remember the previous speaker spoke about energy security? Now, I know there are a number of, if I can just step aside for a second, I know there are a number of Labour Party members here, and I'd suggest that you get hold of a copy of that document and give it a read if you haven't already, and then ask yourself, does it go far enough? But, we're talking about a much smaller drop in the operating stream. Of course, there'll be the Prime Minister's recently announced community initiatives incentives for unconventional gas development. Hang on. So, I'd like somebody to tell me what's in it for the local community. What's in it for the people of Burry Port and the other communities around the Locker Estuary? Not Thursday, the Daily Telegraph published details of a poll by the Institution of Mechanical Engineers and ICO organisation, showing that nearly half of the public oppose fracking in their background. Of course, we have to be careful of NIMBYism. But when you drill down into the details of the poll, you find that already 25% of people are totally opposed to unconventional gas development. Dr. Tim Fox of the Institution of Mechanical Engineers responded by saying, these poll results suggest that simply offering money to local councils and communities is not enough to convince the public about the benefits of fracking for gas, and that much more work needs to be done to engage with citizens in this potential activity. That echoes something that Mr. Fox said some time ago, when he was quoted by Reuters as saying, we need to explain the absolute difference between fracking and the offshore coal gasification technology. Now it appears from this that Mr. Clark thinks opposition to what he's fracking is at least partly based on confusion between UCG and fracking. Unfortunately, this seems to be a typical response from the greater the good when it turns out, as it often does, that the general public don't actually agree with what they think is in our interest. This rather patronising idea that we don't really understand, that we're confused, and that if they could only communicate their message more clearly, we would all see the error of our ways. Is that true? Are we confused? I think we're very clear about what's involved, and about whose interest this is in, and very clear about our response to it. From evidence I've seen, from the discussions I've had with people right across Wales and beyond, it's clear to me that not only do we not want any unconventional gas development within 10 miles of our homes, here in Wales we don't want it within 10 miles of our country. And we certainly don't want it in the Locher Estuary.
Which was under Spanish law lasted for 5 years. So that's what we actually did. What will be required here will be at least that, and I think there'll be other requirements as well.
James,
Okay. I think obviously we kind of know where we are with the environmental and subsistence concerns and stuff like that. I wanted to look more at how are you going to actually get, how are you going to get your product to market? I mean, obviously there's a borehole, but we've had a little bit of mention, not much, of some kind of power station, and obviously there's a question of where that's going to go. How are you going to get your product to market?